Ma'am and honor. The words cracked across the refurbished hall like a salute. General Nathan Lang rose so fast his chair scraped the varnish. He wasn't looking at the mayor or my father. He was looking at me halfway down the aisle because I had obeyed the sentence that sent me there. You sit there. The back row. I didn't move. The room moved. Program stilled. The brass in the balcony fell quiet. The general held my eyes. In the pause, you could hear the building learn a different kind of silence. People will tell this night as if it began there. It didn't. Climaxes make sense only when you know what was practiced. Humiliation repeated long enough starts to look like tradition. 2 hours earlier, the opera house smelled like lemon oil, sawdust, and burned coffee. Volunteers in church aprons slid sheet cake from cardboard to metal pans, laughing like tired people do. My father, chair of the restoration committee, moved through the lobby, checking brass plaques with a foreman's finger. He wore duty like his jacket, snug, pressed a little proud. Looks good, I told him. Chandeliers made soft geometry on the ceiling. The paint was wedding cake cream. The stairs no longer complained. He nodded, already looking past me. Mayor wants the front 2 rows reserved. Honored guests. You can help with coats once they start. Sure, I said. Agreeing to small things keeps rooms from breaking. I was here for the building, not the pageant. My partner James arrived with 2 thermoses and the patient smile of a school superintendent who has survived bond measures. We can skip the speeches he offered. I shook my head. This matters to him. I didn't have to say which him. Programs waited by the doors, donor names in serif type. My father's name was bold. Mine wasn't there. I'd routed my gift into a scholarship for the children of volunteer responders. Anonymous was calmer. It didn't pick a fight. An hour before the crowd, the mayor checked the microphone. The brass warmed up with a hymn no one could name. From the balcony, I counted exits, a habit from fire seasons, mapped rows like wind 8 to the rope 12 to the back aisles, clear for wheelchairs. Danger to me is distances. Then the black sedan pulled up. General Lang stepped out in a civilian suit with a military fit. He shook the mayor's hand, then my father's. My father shone with the tempered light of recognition. He did not look for me. In rooms with ranks, he rarely does. When the ushers opened the doors, the town poured in Union jackets, Sunday dresses, VFW caps, boys in cramped shoes. The place smelled like starch and hopefulness. I stood near the aisle, comfortable at the edge. My father found me. He doesn't hug. He gave the nod that means duty and dismissal. Into the live microphone, he said, "Welcome, friends," then angled his mouth toward me and softer. "Back row is open." Aloud again. "Please take your seats." Privately, with a tone that still reaches the 12-year-old in me, "You sit there." There are sentences you carry like old splinters. You don't rub them. You learn to walk anyway. I started toward the back, counting pew ends, velvet rubbed thin by decades of coats and worries. On stage, someone squared the flags to right angles. In the front row, the mayor gestured to the center seat reserved for the general, and my father, eager and reverent, pulled it out with both hands, his bow wider than necessary. He believes front seats are for men who build. I don't argue beliefs. I work. General Lang did not sit. His eyes swept once the way people do, who have paid for mistakes and found me mid-aisle, exactly where you place someone you intend to be present, but not visible. He stood. Chair legs shrieked. "Ma'am," he said, voice carrying without effort. "An honor." The word moved like a switch. The front row rose first, then the second. In the balcony, a child whispered, "Why?" and a grandmother said, "Watch." The band did not play. The microphones did not crackle. It is a particular American sound. When a room decides to stand shoes, set breath draws in metal buttons, remember their purpose. I did not wave. I let the moment keep its dignity. I stepped forward 2 paces enough so he would not need to raise his voice and said, "Evening, General." He smiled. Not a politician's smile. A field smile. "We meet again," he said, and the word again landed where only a few would hear it. My father either missed it or pretended to. The mayor recovered. "General Lang," she said on behalf of the town, "welcome." then glancing at me with the quick intelligence that keeps church basements from boiling over, and welcome to everyone who kept the lights on and the work steady. The room exhaled once. My father's hand slipped from the back of the chair. He was still standing late by a beat everyone heard. He looked at me the way men look at measurements that don't fit their tape. I won't describe triumph. That isn't what this was. It was correction, the world tipping toward level. It is no small thing when a back row stops being a place you are sent and becomes a place you choose not to stay. A program slid from someone's lap. It sounded like a page turning. The mayor began the dedication history, donors' volunteer hours stacked into a poem. The general did not sit until I stopped moving away. When he finally took his seat, his shoulders squared to the room, not the stage. Seating charts are about sightlines. Tonight, the sightline changed. That's the hook. That's where you meet us, a daughter in the aisle, a father holding a chair, a general on his feet, and a town deciding what it honors. The rest of tonight will make that choice make sense. But remember, the sound, the small chorus of people standing because respect arrived before explanation, and because sometimes the right thing is obvious before it is comfortable. I didn't become a back row person in a single night. It happens like weathering small subtractions until the shape you take seems inevitable. If you want to understand that aisle in the opera house, you have to see the rooms that trained me for it. We lived 2 blocks from the mill in a town that smelled like hot metal and river water. The whistle set our clocks. Fridays meant fish fry at the VFW. My father measured a person by what they could carry and how far. Front row is earned, he'd say. Not cruel, just convinced. In 3rd grade, a blue ribbon for a science project about wind and prairie fire hung on our fridge for 2 days before Dad moved it to a drawer to make room for my cousin's football schedule. Don't lose it, he said. I learned a rule. Some pride is public, some private. At church picnics, he'd set a folding chair at the end and say, "Help the ladies." At parades, he stepped to the curb while I collected candy wrappers. It wasn't meanness. It was assignment by habit. He liked an order where men lifted the heavy end and women fetched more napkins. I grew strong in spaces he didn't look at. The firehouse sat behind the grocery store, low and brick. At 16, while other kids looped the Dairy Queen, I walked into drill night because the scanner on our counter had been my lullaby. Chief Alvarez, mustache black, then put a radio in my hand. "You listen before you talk," he said. Good advice for almost everything. I learned pump curves before I could vote. I read smoke not as color, but as grammar, what it asked for. What it would take if we didn't answer in time. The teasing stopped when my first due maps outcleaned the laminated ones. Wind was a language. Terrain was sentence structure. If you looked long enough, the fire told you its verbs. Dad called it a hobby. "You'll get this out of your system," he said like jean jackets. When the pager buzzed at dinner, he'd test a hinge in his voice. "Be back by midnight." Permission dressed as patience. By senior year, I could pack a hose bed without leaving a cross loose. Boys who tried to impress me with burnouts asked for my physics notes. In the margins, I'd drawn the ICS chart. Boxes and arrows calmed me. You could put chaos in a square and make it report to another square. Graduation? He clapped for the valedictorian until his hands went red. When they called my name for a small scholarship, he nodded and stepped out to take a call. The newspaper photo later showed his arm around the football coach. I was in the background, holding a door for a grandmother with a walker. I liked the job. I also noted the diagram it made. My first fire wasn't cinematic, a kitchen flare-up on Maple. Damp drywall, Crisco steam. We pulled the pan to the porch-popped ceiling, swept embers. In the quiet after water, I heard a baby breathing the way babies do after they've cried to sleep. The mother stood barefoot mascara in 2 clean lines. "It's okay," I told her. Not a promise. An instruction to my own body. That's when it clicked. Calm is a skill you practice until it becomes a place. College would have taken me away, but money and gravity kept me here. I took classes, mornings, ran calls, afternoons, stocked shelves at the hardware store nights. Dad watched me restack a pallet and said, almost proud, "You've got good hands." Praise from him is measured in hardware. I pocketed it like a rare coin. Coach Eileen Hart taught me how to speak without apologizing. Farm-strong voice like a bell. She saw me tracing routes on a county atlas. "You like to know where you are," she said. I said yes. That's leadership before it's a title. Keep it. One August, we were loading water into a brush truck when Dad swung by. He set a sack of burgers on the bench, told the younger guys about lifting an engine block without a hoist. They whistled. He glanced at me. "You still doing this as if it were a summer job?" I handed him the radio. "Want to check weather?" He pressed a button, then set it down like it might break. "Nah," he said. "You know that stuff." It sounded like dismissal, but it was almost trust. County EMS recognized volunteers who'd logged 500 hours. On stage, the MC mispronounced my name. Dad clapped twice, then sat back hard when the next recipient was a boy he'd coached. "That kid works," he said. He wasn't wrong. He just wasn't looking at me. What finally taught me to stop reaching for his front row wasn't anger. It was repetition. I kept showing up. I pre-planned subdivisions no one else had time to study. I learned which fences had gaps and which church lots could take a helicopter if we cut the lampposts. I learned how to say copy in a tone that steadied a frantic voice. The old guys started saying, "Ask Ray," when a map didn't make sense. They meant convenience. I heard trust. The last photo before the big fires shows a VFW dinner. Dad's in the middle with foreman men who built things you can point to from the road. I'm off to the side with the women who run bake raffles and quiet miracles, holding plates, listening to a child describe his Lego ladder truck. We are all doing our jobs. No one is wrong. But the frame teaches the lesson I learned to see a room from its edge and still account for everything in it. So when the back row called my name years later, I knew the route by heart. That's not defeat. That's reconnaissance. The trick is remembering you can walk that far without having to stay there. I didn't graduate straight into command. I learned it the way you learn a fire's temper, by walking the edge until your boots memorize the ground. My first season, I crewed on a Type 3 team riding tailboard on a tender that smelled like diesel and wet canvas. My job was simple. Keep the map honest. Keep the radio brief. Keep fear from leaking into my voice. Chief Alvarez would tap the paper. "Tell me what the wind thinks it's doing." I'd trace the ridge, then the draw, then the subdivision that looked like a trap if smoke laid down. "Copy," I'd say. "Westerly now, but the column's shearing. If it inverts after sundown, we get a canyon chimney." He'd grunt halfway between doubt and faith. "We'll see." We saw. Fence lines flash like fuses. Physics wins. I wasn't brave. I was thorough. I learned to build boxes around chaos division assignments, contingency routes, church basements ready for cots by midnight. I carried a Sharpie, a grease pencil, and a willingness to be the person folks yelled at when they were scared. By the time I promoted to division, I could read a weather briefing like scripture relative humidity, Haynes stability, the little lies wine tells through cottonwoods. The crew trusted my copy. I wasn't trying to be tough. I was trying to be useful. The big year came like a string of beads, each bead a county on fire. Utah, Colorado, then home. By August, sleep was a rumor. I learned to speak in time signatures. Division Charlie. 2 minutes, then you're hot. People do better when you tell them when the hard thing will end. We met General Nathan Lang in a gym-turned-incident command post cots on the basketball court. He wore civilians, but the set of him read military. The guard was flying Chinooks for bucket drops and possible evac. Our canyon was a problem. One road in, one road out, switchbacked like a bad idea. At 2140, the wind behaved until it didn't. The column collapsed, then rebounded the kind of tantrum you feel in your bones. Engines staged at the canyon mouth. Crews fired a dozer line that looked good on a map and terrible under a red moon. The town at the end had a nursing home, a propane yard, and exactly one way to leave if the smoke turned to night. Options, Lang asked. Hold and pray, someone said. I flattened a county map on the hood and drew 3 lines. We reverse. Stagger the convoy. Send ambulances last sirens spook drivers. Light the east shoulder to pull it uphill and by a tunnel. My voice stayed steady. Lang's eyes went from the map to my hands. You'll take the lead. Copy. Assignment accepted. At 22:11, we pushed the first convoy. At 22:17, when smoke dropped and engines vanished into a world the color of iron, I walked into the road with a chem light and the stubborn faith that comes from counting too much. We moved by numbers. 4 cars. Pause. 5 breaths. Pull the next. A firefighter rode tail on the last school bus like a mother would. A man flagged us down. His father was bedbound, oxygen tank bigger than good sense. We lifted the old man to a pickup while another coiled the tubing so it wouldn't kink. Follow the taillights, I told the son, tapping the bumper twice. At 23:03, a flare-up licked the dozer line and the radio hit a pitch I hate. I wanted to run to it like everyone else. Instead, I stood in the road and counted 8 seconds before I waved the next 4 cars. Command isn't heroics. It's rhythm you force on chaos. By 0040, the canyon disgorged the last ambulance. The nursing home's porch lights showed faces like damp paper. We sent a crew back to knock down the last angry pockets. Nobody died. You don't celebrate after a maybe. You sit on a tailgate and let your hands shake where no one can see them. After 01:00, Lang found me by the maps. He didn't say thank you. He said, "What did you see that we didn't?" "The wind lied," I said. "It always does once, before it shows you who it is." He nodded like a man who recognized a sermon he could believe. Morning brought press. I stayed off camera and made sure seasonal crews got the hazard pay the computer always forgot. If power means anything, it means fixing the part that eats the small folks first. Quiet victories stacked different. We changed the morning check from injuries to sleep food head. The old guys grumbled until the first time someone answered bad, and we caught a spiral. I wrote a 1-page sheet on evacuation pacing that fit in a glove box and used plain words. Someone taped it to the fridge and started calling it the red line. The year ended in mud and smoke and a tire that feels like debt. The state mailed a certificate Type 1 qualified. I tucked it in a drawer. James framed it. "Let this one live on a wall," he said. I called Dad that night, kept it casual, got a new card in my wallet. He talked about the mill and a neighbor's leaking roof. He meant no harm. He didn't ask. I didn't offer. But rooms remember. When the town needed a safety plan for the refurbished hall, my name surfaced, then slid into a committee note that didn't make the program. I didn't mind. I already had the map aisle's exits timed to clear a balcony if the lights failed and panic didn't. Which is why, when a general looked up from a front row chair years later and stood for the woman in the aisle, it made sense to the folks who'd watched a convoy pour out of a canyon, because a stranger with a chem light counted to 8 before she waved them through. Tonight wasn't about rank. It was about memory. Some rooms know who stood when the air went dark, and they teach other rooms how to stand too. The Opera House had always been a memory of other people's applause. For a decade, it sat dark pigeons in the rafters, rain licking the plaster into petals. When the mill rebounded and grants came through, the town decided to raise the old ceiling back into a sky worth standing under. My father volunteered first. He doesn't do halfway. He runs committees like he runs a job site, pencil behind his ear, minutes in his head, respect arranged by seniority and calluses. He asked me to help with the safety piece like a gasket you tighten once and forget. I walked the building with a flashlight and a teacher's patience. I counted every seat, clocked how long it took to clear a balcony, in darkness, mapped which exits would choke if 2 people argued. I taped a single sheet to the back of the stage door, plain words, no acronyms. If lights fail, usher to door. Whisper, don't shout. Touch shoulder, not elbow. Count, don't herd. Chief Alvarez read it and nodded like a man who finds a tool in the drawer he didn't know he needed. Dad read it and said, "Looks fine in the tone you use for a spare tire you hope you won't need. He prefers fixes you can photograph." The fundraising season put his name in the paper so often even he started folding it inside out. He liked the part where he could point at progress handrails, polished paint line, crisp along the chairback's heat that breathed without rattling. The front 2 rows, he said at a committee meeting, are for the folks who made this possible. He meant donors like himself. The mayor offered an inclusive addendum. And the volunteers who logged the hours, she said, glancing toward me. Dad wrote builders in the minutes and underlined it twice. When the donor list went to print, I asked to keep my contribution anonymous and earmarked for a scholarship tied to the responder families who always buy the secondhand tuxedo for prom. Anonymous, Dad said. People want to see who gave. They'll see it when a kid goes to school, I said. He didn't argue. He simply approved a draft where the builders section ate half a page in serif type and the community section fit into a polite column. If you've ever read a program, you know where the I lands. The week before the dedication, I walked in on a logistics meeting, a folding table under a chandelier, coffee in paper cups, sweating rings. A young usher asked if the general would have security. Dad said, "We'll treat him right." Then turning to me, "Can you keep an eye on coats and umbrellas? We don't need chaos in the lobby." It was the way he said, "We like the word is a tool he owns." James squeezed my hand under the table. After in the stairwell, he offered an exit. "We don't have to do this," he said. "We can go get pie, leave them their rows." I shook my head. "I'm not here for rows. I'm here for the egress." I wrote a quick note for ushers, how to read a crowd, where to stand, so your shoulder blocks panic without advertising, fear the trick of repeating "this way" in a tone steady enough to be borrowed. I taped the note under the podium and left a copy with the brass in the balcony. If you stop playing, I told them, stop together. Silence is a tool if you agree on it. The morning of the event, the opera house smelled like lemon oil, an ancient dust finally told to behave. Volunteers rotated sheet cakes. A teenage girl practiced the order of flags. A veteran straightened his tie in a glass door. I walked the aisles again, counting steps between each exit and the alley. I pictured old knees strollers, the pride that refuses to be hurried, and I adjusted where the rope lay so no one would have to climb it. You can change destiny by an inch if you change the angle. Dad found me backstage checking the fire curtain. Mayor says General Lang confirmed. He said words tidy with importance. Front center. He tugged his jacket hem. "You'll want to dress. You know, neat." "I'm fine," I said. Jeans that kneel, a blazer that travels, boots that never pinch. He looked at the boots like they contradicted the ceiling. In the lobby, he ran his hand along a brass rail and beamed. Pride suits him. I wish it had room for more kinds. Programs sat in tidy stacks. On the inside page, the safety plan was a paragraph the font size of a whisper. The builder's spread glowed. James, who reads everything, folded his copy once and tucked it inside his jacket. "You wrote more of this night than anyone knows," he said. "That's okay," I said. "Maps are supposed to be invisible when they work." The black sedan pulled up, and with it, the ripple that runs through a small town when a big name appears. Nathan Lang stepped out in a civilian suit that already knew where its creases belong. He shook the mayor's hand in a way that respected her, not the office. He shook my father's hand like a man who has learned to be generous with eye contact. Dad swelled. "Treating a man right is a religion here." "Who's on programs?" Dad asked. I lifted a stack. "Right here." He nodded. "Good. Keep the line moving. We don't want people clogging the aisles." The irony did not need a spotlight. Doors opened. The room filled with the sound of cotton and wool finding chairs. The brass worked through a hymn and then stopped as rehearsed together, so the hush walked in with the people. The mayor took the microphone and welcomed neighbors and friends. My father adjusted the reserved signs in the front row like a chef sets knives. He looked toward the doors, then toward me. The nod he gave meant assignment more than greeting. I had been waiting for it all week and 40 years. "Back rows open," he said, voice angled away from the mic. To anyone else, it would sound like logistics. To me, it sounded like habit. Then more private, the phrase I knew from gymnasiums and banquet halls and Sundays where there were never enough chairs up front. You sit there. He wasn't angry. He was right according to a math he trusted. He believes the front is for men who built. I have tried to show him that a map is a kind of building. Belief rarely reroutes quickly. I took the aisle. Programs shushed against my palm. On-stage flags aligned with a carpenter's precision. In the front row, the mayor gestured to the center seat with the economy of a woman who has kept order at pancake breakfasts and ribbon cuttings. My father stepped to it, pulled the chair out and bowed the way he bows deeper than necessary to make sure the respect doesn't spill. Lang didn't sit. I felt it before I saw it, the altered pressure in a room when one person refuses choreography. He turned his head in a slow, careful arc like a pilot scanning instruments after a jolt. His gaze landed mid-aisle. On me, the person carrying paper steering codes, moving quietly along the wall because it keeps things simple. Some stories would give you a drum roll. This one gives you a pair of heels, stopping on varnished oak, and a breath shared by 100 people who don't yet know what courtesy looks like when it corrects itself. General, the mayor said softly. Mick lowered. He rose. The front row hadn't stood yet. You could hear the rubber tips of canes and the scrape of a chair foot. My father's hand was still on the chair back palm, curved into the velvet like a brand. He had the smallest smile the one men wear when they are about to be seen standing next to history. That was the moment before the moment. The invitation to be small had been extended, typed, rehearsed, printed, spoken. I had accepted it all afternoon as a means to keep air in the room. But something else, something I did not cue, was about to answer. He didn't sit because the room had been measured wrong, and men like Nathan Lang have a gift for resetting levels without breaking the floor. He turned from the center seat and faced the aisle. Ma'am, he said, no microphone, just a voice that knows how to travel in honor. The phrase went through the hall like a breeze through wheat. People stood in ripples, unsure why their knees obeyed before their minds did. I felt heat on my face from the stage lights and the faint starch of programs in my hand. My father's palm remained on the chair back then, lifted, unsure whether to offer it to me or swallow it in his pocket. He chose air. The mayor moved with the instincts of a woman who keeps peace at town budgets and funerals. She stepped up and held the microphone between palms like a prayer. General, she said, would you? Lang took it, but not the stage. He stayed on the floor level with the front row level with me. Before we begin, just a minute. He looked at my father, not unkindly. Sir, you pulled out this chair for me as a courtesy. I'll return it as one. He turned to the room. Years back on a canyon night, our state had a problem. One road in, one road out. Wind lied. Fire told the truth the hard way. A convoy of folks, old and young, oxygen tanks and pickup trucks needed to leave before the road turned into a story we'd have to tell our children with our hats off. He didn't look at me as he said it. He watched the faces who had not been there, and he let them be there now. A map appeared. He continued, not a fancy one, county issue grease pencil. The person who drew it didn't raise their voice. They counted. 4 cars pause, 5 breaths pull the next. They lit the shoulder where the fire would want to lean, so it leaned the way we needed. We moved 300 souls through a place that looked like the end of the world. We lost no one. He finally pivoted to me. We did that because of the woman in the aisle. She taught us that command is a rhythm, not a shout. He offered the mic. I shook my head. Let the map speak. Chief Alvarez stood from 2 rows back, tie-loosened eyes older than the mustache I first knew. The sheet she wrote after that glove box won, you've seen it, he called. He held up a laminated square edges, scuffed by years of dashboards. A few folks nodded, surprised to recognize something they'd used without ever meeting the hand that made it. We call it the red line. You taped it to my fridge, a woman in a church sweater said to her husband before she remembered where she was. Lang smiled. We used it on guard drills last fall, he added. Cut confusion, cut incidents. He exhaled through his nose, a quiet laugh at how simple tools can outrun speeches. Tonight, you're dedicating a hall. Rooms like this become safe because someone counts in the dark. He glanced at the chair my father had pulled and then at the row behind it. I'd be honored if this front seat went to Mrs. Whitaker, he said, tipping the mic toward a silver-haired woman in a black dress whose hands held a program in the absence of a ring. Her husband, a firefighter, hadn't come home from a roof collapse 3 summers prior. She had walked in alone and taken a seat 3 rows back with the women who remember casseroles and accounts. The air changed. The mayor looked to me. I felt the weight and passed it forward. Please, I said to Mrs. Whitaker, not as an invitation but a correction. This is yours. She stood like old oaks do, slow then straight, and made her way down the aisle. People stepped aside, and the stepping aside felt like a sacrament we'd forgotten and were learning again. My father, caught in the cross-currents of his own manners, and this new map, stepped back and let the chair be hers. He did not bow, he nodded. For him, that's a bow. When Mrs. Whitaker sat, the general finally took the seat beside her, not the one my father had held. He angled his body toward the room, elbow on his knee, as if this were a briefing and the first good question would save time later. It would also honor me, he said, if Ms. Morgan Ray, he looked at me for permission to use the name I use when work is done, sat with us. All eyes turned. I felt James somewhere behind me, a steady presence, like the weight of a ring you wear for usefulness, not show. I stepped forward 2 paces and stopped. Thank you, General. I'm fine here. I looked back at the seats reserved behind the first row, names printed on cardstock, a small square for a dead man, a bigger square for a living story, and then to the aisle where ushers stood in their practice places. If that seat's moving, I said, let it move to one of the volunteer kids who worked the paint off their hands on this ceiling. I pointed to a teenager who had been too shy to take a reserved spot even when begged. He froze. The room clucked gentle approval until he unglued and walked down, cheeks red, tie imperfect. I took the end of a second-row seat where I could still watch the exits. The general nodded, satisfied not that I'd refused honor, but that I'd placed it on a line where it would do more. The mayor, quick as a catcher, slid back into the program. Friends, neighbors, let's dedicate this space. She read names like Abel Toll, builders, painters, grant writers, sweepers. When she reached safety plan coordination, she paused, adjusted her glasses, and read the paragraph in a bigger voice than the font deserved. Authored by Ray Morgan, she said, and then, after the small cheer whose maps help us leave when we must and stay when we can. It was not poetry. It was enough. My father stayed standing a heartbeat longer than the room then sat. He stared at the stage as if the lumber under it might explain something about me that wood could not. I felt no triumph and no pity, only that strange relief when a picture finally hangs level, the tilt corrected, you didn't know was making you seasick. Mid-ceremony, a brass player in the balcony rested his horn and wiped his mouth with the fastidiousness of a man who doesn't want to print fingerprints on burnished things. He looked down toward me and tipped his chin. I tipped back. Courtesy learned how to move. After speeches and plaques, and a benediction improvised by a pastor who smells like motor oil, and books, the general returned the mic to the mayor and turned to my father. Sir, he said, offering his hand, you built a fine room. Dad took it. We had help. He did not look at me. He looked at the ceiling he could claim. The general followed his gaze up, then down, then past toward the ushers, the exit ropes, the teenagers against the back wall still standing, because no one had told them to sit. Front rows, Lang said, voice private now, are for the people you make room for. He wasn't scolding. He was measuring. My father's mouth worked once, twice, like a man trying to bite through a knot. We try to treat a guest right. He said the sentence he trusts when the ground shifts. We do. The general agreed. Tonight, I was the guest. He angled his thumb toward me. Without show is why we can treat guests right at all. You could hear the words land inside my father like a tool falling into a quiet drawer. The mayor closed with thanks. The band struck up a march soft enough to be walked over. People clapped, then talked like rain after a long dry. The Opera House restored had learned a better use for its front row than the one printed in the minutes. I stood not to leave, but to let the crowd unstitch. Mrs. Whitaker touched my sleeve as she passed. Thank you for the seat, she said. It felt sized right. You sized it, I said. We just moved it where everyone could see. From the doorway, James lifted 2 fingers pie. Later, I mouthed, and he grinned, because later is a word you can build a life around. My father stayed seated long after the honored guest had shaken hands, and the teenagers had learned a new way to walk down an aisle. He watched people go the way builders do, eyeing joints weight strain, how the whole holds. He finally rose, pressing his fingers into the velvet as if it could tell him something about pressure and give. When he turned toward me, there was a question in his face. He did not know how to ask it yet. He would have a chance. The night wasn't over. The part after applause is where choices live. The foyer after a ceremony looked like a basement after a wedding, cups in a drift frosting smudges, people unwilling to go home because something undecided hung in the air. The opera house smelled of warm coffee and lemon oil. Ushers leaned into the wall and let their shoes remember they were leather, not duty. "Good night, Ms. Morgan," a teenager said, proud and awkward. Another held out a program. "Could you sign?" I wrote my name small under the safety paragraph and added, "Practice is how panic slows down." James found me by the water cooler. "Pie?" he asked, hopeful. "Soon," I said. "One more walk of the exits. New rituals need rehearsal." He nodded. "I'll warm the car." "Then lower. He's looking for you." My father waited where the light turned tungsten, arms crossed like a man pretending indecision is a jacket. He studied a bulletin board as if one of the flyers might rescue him. "Dad," I said. The word felt factual. He cleared his throat. "That fellow General Lang, how do you two—" He paused long enough to save pride. "Know each other." "Work," I said. "Canyon evacuation." We overlapped. He waited for more. I let the sentence stand. "You didn't tell me," he said. "You didn't ask." I answered, "No heat. Anger is an accelerant. You don't light it indoors." He looked toward the doors. "I meant to put you in the program," he tried. "Deadlines, committees." He trailed off. Even he hates obvious lies. "I asked to stay off," I said. "Scholarship fund." That he said, catching familiar ground. "Anonymous." The smile he tried didn't fit. "You always had a way of hiding in the machinery." "Hiding isn't the point of a map," I said. "Making room is." He thumbed the bent corner of a reserved sign. "Front rows for men who built this," he said softly, like the plaster might argue. "They hammered. They sweated." I looked at his hands, the scar on the index knuckle from the summer he outstubborned a stripped screw. "They did," I said. "And some of us built the part that means the crowd goes home." He sucked his teeth. "I didn't mean men." "Men," he said. "You know what I meant." "I do," I answered, gentler. "Lumber teaches loud. Maps are quieter. They still hold weight." We stood like people who have carried the same box up the same stairs, and only now notice they've been lifting by different handles. James drifted back and offered my father a napkin, like an olive branch. "There's a line in my world," he said. "Some hands build with hammers, some with syllabi, some with maps. The town only stands if all three keep their form." Dad folded the napkin, once then again, then stopped when he heard the tick in it. "I didn't mean to embarrass you," he said, eyes on the floor's shine. "I thought the guest ought to have the seat." "He did," I said. "He gave it away. That's what makes it a front row." He tried again. "Ray, The sentence shook. "Pride is scaffolding. You don't yank it. You ask where it wants to land." I let the silence hold. He found a narrower path. "You did good work, sounds like." He nodded as if confirming a permit. "That evacuation. The sheet." "Red line," I said. "It's a gray piece of plastic now. Laminate's ugly." "Does it save people?" he asked, almost whispering. "It helps scared folks do the next right thing," I said. "And it helps the calm ones show them how." He exhaled. "Well," he said, and let it stand. "I'm running a training tomorrow," I said. "Town Square 9, kids and volunteers, chalk cones, whistles." He made it a joke to avoid a choice. "Whistles." "Whistles," I confirmed. James bowed. "I am the Sousa of safety." A corner of Dad's mouth moved. He checked his watch, found no appointment to hide behind. "I've got cleanup," he offered. "Stack chairs, count receipts." "You can do both," I said. "Stack tonight, watch tomorrow, or keep the back row. Not punishment, just a choice." He studied the bulletin board like an answer might be pinned there. "We'll see." He said the phrase he's used my whole life, when a no wants to sound like a maybe. "Okay," I said. "We start at 9. We said goodnight to the mayor, to ushers who had learned to stop playing together, to Mrs. Whitaker, who held her program like a hymn. Outside, the night smelled like wet brick and the relief that follows a crowd that sat where it should. At home, I spread the day on the kitchen table the way you spread a map before the next leg. I journaled in bullet points the habit that keeps a radio brain from drowning in narrative. Aisle calculus worked. Front row corrected itself. Dad asked questions without armor. Tomorrow cones chalk this way. Script kids lead rotations. I drafted the session plan with the bones I use on line briefings. Keep sentences short enough to survive wind. Keep faces in mind. Keep the exit visible while you teach the room where to stay. When I finished, the house was quiet except for the old clock from my mother's classroom. I thought of her cardigans and the way she'd stand by the door during fire drills, one hand on the frame, the other counting sneakers. "We're still counting, Mom?" I whispered and turned out the light. Across town, my father lingered with the custodian's cart and a plastic bag for left programs. He stacked chairs because stacking proves something happened. He picked up a program and read the paragraph he'd skimmed. The font was still small. He read every word. In a seat crack, someone had tucked a laminated square. He worked it free and held the red line at arm's length like he was checking a joist. The plastic was cloudy from hands. In the corner, my initials, RM. He slid it into his jacket, took it out, slid it back. Argument and answer in the same pocket. He looked at the front row. One last time, then walked to the back, lifted a chair, and carried it forward to the stack nearest the stage. It was not an apology. It was a load. Morning arrived, with a kind of light small towns deserve, gentle, honest. No big promises. The square still held last night's Echo lemon oil and brass polish, lingering under the fresher smells of coffee and chalk dust. We set cones in a loop that made sense to me, 3 lanes like an artery, a circle in the center like a heart. James unfolded a card table and laid out whistles and photocopied maps. The maps were simple, 4 arrows, 2 words, a box in red. Kids love boxes. So do people who have been frightened long enough to crave edges. Mayor Kim came early with a clipboard and sleeves rolled above her wrists like a person who understands grants and grease. "Short remarks," she asked. I shook my head. "Demonstrate, don't declare." She smiled. "My favorite budget line." Chief Alvarez backed a truck up to the curb and popped the tailgate, revealing a milk crate full of laminated red lines that looked worn enough to be trusted. "Class set," he said. "You sign 20, I'll sign 20. Neighbors filtered in retirees and windbreakers, parents gripping coffee draggers of reluctant teenagers who straightened when they saw peers. Mrs. Whitaker wore the same black dress she had last night, as if grief had a uniform, and she honored it. She took a seat on the curb without making fuss of her knees. The teenager from the newly front row hovered near the map's hands, jammed into pockets to hide the shake of being seen. I put him on whistle duty, first person, to tell us when to stop. It made him taller. General Lang arrived without a sedan or a salute. He walked the sidewalks like a man checking fence lines, nodded to the mayor, then stood behind the card table and asked if he could sort whistles. I watched a 4-star line them by color, then by length of lanyard. "Counts faster," he said, not to me, to the world. At 9 on the nose, I blew 2 short blasts and the square tightened. I greeted them the way I greet a crew after a hot night. "Good morning. We're going to practice then. Practice again so that practice has somewhere to go when nerves show up. You'll hear me say the same words a lot. That's on purpose." We started with the simplest drill, 4 steps and a turn. People laughed at themselves, then at each other, then at the fact that laughing didn't break the work. "You are writing a script your body can read when your mind is noisy," I said. "When a room needs leaving, it needs quiet sentences." Kids loved the whistle. They wanted to be the ones to stop the adults. I let them. I set a 10-year-old with serious eyes at the edge and told her she was the boss of pause. She lifted her chin like a conductor and learned that power is a tempo you lend, not hoard. When she blew her grandmother standing near the bakery, stopped exactly where she was, and smiled as if obedience could feel like a gift. Mayor Kim moved through the crowd with scholarship forms. Sign here, she told a first-year EMT whose boots still creaked new. Your tuition doesn't have to wait on a second job. She kept her voice modest, but the pen shook in the kid's hand until his mother covered it with hers. The mayor looked toward me, raised a thumb, then returned to her clipboard. She knows how to close a loop. Half an hour in, my father arrived. No entrance, no excuse. He carried the folding chair from his truck like a person ferrying an apology too fragile for words. He stood at the back, long enough to be sure he wasn't being watched, then eased the chair through the crowd and set it near Mrs. Whitaker. "Ma'am," he said, plain as hardware. "Front's better for backs." He stayed standing beside it, hands on hips, as if he were measuring a plumb line only he could see. When the first rotation ended, he wandered to the cones and moved 2 by the width of his boot. It improved the angle for strollers and wheelchairs. He didn't announce it. He didn't look at me. He stacked 2 extra cones near the curb, in case a toddler turned restless, and ran. He knew toddler physics from raising me. He just hadn't used it in this direction before. I kept my eyes on the flow and my ear on the whistle. Lang urshed teenagers toward the chalk and had them redraw the circle bigger. Room for the slowest is the measure for all he said, not to the kids, but to the chalk. Chief Alvarez led an aisle count with the men who will tell this story later at coffee. 22 steps to the corner, 30 to the alley, 60 to the truck. They timed themselves. Men love beating their own numbers. I let the instinct serve us. Between drills, Mayor Kim stood on the card table's shadow and announced the first scholarship recipient, a young mother who volunteers nights at the hotline and weekends with the Medical Reserve Corps. She looked ready to refuse the check on principle and then accepted it because she had a kid watching. The town applauded in the low, good way that means people recognize a bill paid without spectacle. Dad drifted toward me, slow as weather. "Your whistle," he said. "Because compliments can hide in nouns, sounds like a job site when the beam swings." I answered with the same grammar. "Your cones," I said, took the corner out of that turn. He squinted into the sun like he was blaming it for making his eyes wet. "You wrote this?" he asked, nodding toward a red line in the hand of a boy who'd memorized it already. "With help," I said. "Wind did part. Neighbors too." He grunted, and the grunt had 3 decades of unsaid in it. Then he stepped away to show a teenage usher how to stand like a lamppost in the right place and a door in the other. Last drill, we practiced a full exit. I told him the rules: no running, no talking, no heroics that block someone else's small win. The girl with the serious eyes blew her whistle, and the square obeyed its own practice. People moved like water, given the correct channel. When they reached the corners, they turned as if they had always turned that way. I watched a man lower his shoulder to make a corridor for a walker. I watched a teenager hold a door with his back, not because anyone told him to, but because he loved the sound of people passing through. We reset for applause, not for me, for the room. Front rows, I said to close, are built by who you make room for. I pointed to the cones, the chalk circle, the girl with the whistle. Mrs. Whitaker on the chair my father had carried the teenagers with red lines folded in back pockets like talismans. This, I said, is a front row. A small hand tugged my sleeve. The serious-eyed girl held up her map. "Ma'am, can you sign it?" I knelt. I wrote my initials in the corner where a box met an arrow. "This matters more than most signatures," I said, "because you'll use it for other people." Off to my right, I heard Lang's voice, just above the murmur, not a performance, just the line he uses when a room has found its level. "Ma'am," he said to the air that carried it to me, "an honor." The crowd loosened like a muscle exhale. People started talking breakfast church, the game later. They folded chairs without being asked. Dad left his own standing. He didn't sit in it. He stood beside it and watched the circle erase its own chalk slowly, the way good things linger on purpose. When we finished, James put an arm around my shoulder and rested his chin in my hair. "Pie, now?" he asked. "Pie, now," I said. We turned to go. My father stepped forward, stopped, then pointed at the chair by Mrs. Whitaker and spread his hands as if to say, "I moved the seat. It moved me back." It wasn't eloquent. It was accurate. We walked home by the long streets that pass the mill and the river. The day had that clean after feeling towns get when they've practiced being a better place. Behind us, kids chalked arrows that led to nowhere important and everywhere that mattered. Sometimes revenge is not a strike. It's a layout. It's a chair carried forward and left there. It's a map drawn simple enough that everyone can pass through and brag old later that they stood when standing taught the room what to do. If this story found you, take a breath before you close it. Remember the person who made room for you when a door felt narrow. Maybe send them a note today. And if you've ever been pointed to a back row, consider who you might bring forward quietly without a speech. If you'd like more stories about building dignity where it's been short, pull up a chair with us. Share this one with someone who needs the map. Subscribe if you'd like to practice together.